For it is by grace you are saved through faith, not of yourselves, but it is a gift of God. Ephesians 2:8. Welcome to Grace Bond Ministries. Hey everybody, welcome to Grace Bond Ministries. Jonathan here, and Christian is back because on the last one he was on vacation, and now he's back from children's camp. So he's back on the podcast to talk about children and their murders. So but we're talking about abortion today. Oh gosh, I hope I didn't just give away our position. But we're talking about abortion. Listen, there's just so much stuff. There's so much stuff said. There's so many arguments out there. And now, of course, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which we'll get into a little bit, we're not going to focus on that overturning, but we are going to mention it briefly. But you know, just since this topic has come up again, and it's come up majorly, and it's all over social media, and there's just these one-liner memes going around, and so there's just a lot of stuff being said. I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be discussed, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna introduce the topic a little bit, talk about a few scriptures, talk about the development of the fetus of a child, and we got a couple other things. We're going to talk about arguments from the pro-choice side. We're going to talk about some of the application of all this stuff for today. So we've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to go ahead and jump into it here. So Christian, go ahead and just kind of introduce us to this topic, and just let us know what are we getting into on this podcast.
All right. So this is a topic that has been near and dear to my heart. I loved ethics in college. And the topic of abortion was what I wrote my senior paper on. And so starting with the history, this has been around way before Roe versus Wade had happened, that court case had happened. You see early church fathers talking about this act of abortion. And we see even in the Old Testament where child sacrifice was a major issue. And so you have infanticide, you have the issue of abortion even then. And back then, they didn't have any form of medical technology that they would have today. But we see even in the early church fathers where all or most of them would be against abortion during that time. Augustine had a little different views with the issue of whether children who had died were saved or not, but that's a different day for a different podcast. And so a lot of the issues, I think, come into play is when we see this on social media, when we see it on the news, we really only see the extremes of both sides. We see the extreme pro-choice people and the extreme pro-life people. Because if you boil it down to it, if you don't show the extreme sides, it would probably not make the news and it wouldn't infuriate anybody. And so if you talk to any pro-choice person, probably 90% of them would say that abortion is not the ideal situation. Even if they believe that it's okay in certain situations, it is not the ideal situation. And so cases in the US specifically have been started with Roe v. Wade in 1973, and then there have been several up into this point that we are today, where we saw it overturned this year. Do you have anything to add, Jonathan, before we get into some scriptures?
It's obviously, if you haven't figured it out now, this is a very heated topic, and that's one of the reasons Grace Bond Ministries exists, because we want to have open discussions and calm discussions with people who disagree and talk about topics that are tough, and we want to talk about it in an intellectual way and in a normal, common conversational way. So listen, if anybody's watching this and you're like, hey, I'd like to give a few more points of why I'm pro-choice, Christian or non-Christian, let's talk. Because I mean, like right now, we've got a Christian and we've got a Jonathan. No. But it's an important debate, though. I mean, and we're going to get into personhood here in a second. But is abortion murder? And pretty much anybody would say, and not only that, is if a fetus does have personhood, that would mean that the fetus not only does it have personhood, but it's also an innocent person. So it's a little different than like the debate about what's it called, corporal punishment.
Yeah, capital punishment. Yeah,
Capital punishment. That's the word I was looking for. So the conversations are a little different because then we're not talking about innocence at that point. We're talking about just personhood in general. Is personhood enough to keep you from murdering someone, even though they've done all these bad things? That would be a good topic for another day too, Christian.
yeah.
So it's a very important topic. It gets very heated, but I think it's something that we need to talk about. And if you're, and we'll just be straightforward here at the beginning. We're both pro-life. I don't know about Christian, but I still struggle with cases of possible health issues and rape and incest, stuff like that. I still struggle with those a little bit, and we'll talk about those here more in just a second. But we're both pro-life. We're not pro-choice. We're pro-life. So if you're listening to this and you're pro-choice, just hear us out. All right. And if you if you can get on here and challenge us some more about this, we'd love to have you on and ask you a few questions and just challenge us, or whatever. If you just want to respond, we'll let you respond, and we'll just kind of ask questions as you respond to whatever we say in this podcast. But anyways, I think that's probably pretty good there, just to get us started and open us up. We're going to move on to some of the scriptures that talk about that. The scriptures we're looking at, really are they're really to signify that that God considered a fetus or something, or a fetus or a baby that was in the womb to actually contain personhood or have the qualities of personhood. So that's kind of what we think the Bible. I think it's pretty obvious. I don't think anybody would argue with this much, but that God thinks that the fetus in the womb is or has the qualities of personhood. So Christian, you want to jump into your scriptures here? I could do a couple of them too if you want me to, but
yeah. First one is probably one of the main passages you ever heard if somebody was arguing against abortion from a biblical standpoint. Psalm 139, 13 through 16. It says, "For it was you who created my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because I have been remarkably and wondrously made. Your works are wondrous, and I know this very well. My bones were not hidden from you when I was made in secret, when I was formed in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days were written in your book and planned before a single one of them began." And so we see just the importance God puts on these fetuses, on the act of conception, that when that baby is formed, God had a purpose for it already, and that he put this specific DNA for this specific child in this specific time. And so maybe it's not our timing, but if you look at anything else, we figure out God's timing is not our timing most of the time. So do you want to go pick another one, Jonathan?
Yeah. Actually, you go ahead and do one more. I'm trying to look for one.
All right, sounds good. Job 3:3. This one is a little different. We know most people know the story of Job, where he was a follower of God, and then Satan wanted to test him to see if he truly would still follow God as close as he did. But Job 3:3 says, "Let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said a boy is conceived." And so we see the word specifically used for boy as in showing personhood. And abortion debates, especially as they started off, I think personhood was one of the main factors, because if you say it's a person, then that would be innocent, and that would therefore put it up as murder. And so I think over time, I've seen the debate go away from personhood and be more for the choice, looking at the women's side and ignoring the fact of the innocent life, where they know it's maybe a person, but what does that exactly mean? And we're more focused on the woman who is having this child. Were you able to find that passage, Jonathan?
Yeah. So the one, I just, because most people have heard that one, or the one from Psalms is usually like Christian said, everybody's going to hear that one if you argue with a Christian on this. Now, granted, we're about to make some arguments that we don't think we necessarily need the Bible. So I don't think you have to be a Christian to be pro-life. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. So if you're listening to this and you're not a Christian, don't think, oh, I should just shut them off now as they're talking about the Bible. No, listen to us out. We're going to be done with the scriptures here in just a second. But we're going to talk about the development of the fetus and some other philosophical reasons we think, that the baby does contain the qualities of personhood. But we just want to make sure for the Christians watching that that the Bible does indicate that that the fetus in the womb has personhood, and that and every time it talks about these specific children in the Bible, that God said, "I knew you," or like in this one, Isaiah, "The Lord called me from the womb, from the body of my mother, He named me." God saw that Isaiah was going to be born, and He was planning to use Isaiah while he was in the womb. And so the God has a plan for the children in the womb throughout Scripture. And my favorite though is John the Baptist. When John the Baptist is in the womb, it says, in those days, Mary set out and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judah. This is Luke chapter 1, verse 39, verse 40, where she entered Zechariah's house and greeted Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth was basically Mary's cousin, right? No, yeah, cousin. No, that was Mary's sister. Yeah. Elizabeth was Mary's sister. And so Elizabeth was also pregnant with John the Baptist, who I believe was 6 months older than Jesus. And so in verse 40, it says she went to Zechariah's house and greeted Elizabeth. Verse 41, when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped inside her, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Then she exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and your child will be blessed." So she basically found out that Mary was pregnant, and I think Elizabeth knew it, and Zechariah knew it, and obviously Jesus knew it, and God knew it, and John the Baptist even knew it in the womb. Now that's a fascinating thing, how the baby jumped. I think that was a movement of the Spirit. It's that'd be hard to get into the science of it, but there's just something there's always, and be going through, my wife being pregnant and stuff like that. It did seem like there were times when when Emerald, when she would kind of move around, she would jump around or whatever, when she would kind of get excited about certain voices, certain places, when Allie was excited, the baby was excited, so it was cool to see. So how all that was connected, scientifically and biologically, I don't really know, but it's just cool to see that the John the Baptist here, even in the womb, of course, John the Baptist, he ended up representing, he ended up being the voice crying in the wilderness. The prophecy, he fulfilled that prophecy, and he paved the way for Jesus, so to speak. But it's just absolutely remarkable that a fetus jumped like that just at the sound of Jesus coming. But that just shows you that there is personhood to a baby in the womb, along with these other verses. But let's see, do we have any other ones? Oh, the image of God. You want to do that one?
Yeah. So if we go and we look at Genesis from the very beginning, we see once again God's importance of looking at each of us. So in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the fish, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. This is another common verse, but I think shows real importance, where if you look at all the creation, the male and female, this human, this person was specific to God. It was a special, unique creation, and we were made in the image of God, unlike anything else that was created in creation. And so as a Christian, if you're called to treat people as being in the image of God, we see their importance, and we wouldn't do something to somebody if we saw that importance. And that argument goes for many different things within the Christian circle of why we wouldn't do things to people because they're made in the image of God. We see the importance of everybody, and so we treat them differently. It's how you love, like Jesus loved.
Yeah, and then in the book of James in the New Testament, he talks about how, we slander people with our tongues, and these people are the image bearers of God, So that's another thing, we teach off that idea all the way from the beginning of the Bible, that all people are image bearers of God, and so if we can say with, scientifically, philosophically, that that the fetuses do have the qualities of personhood, then we need to treat them like such. We need to treat them as God's image bearers, And so, so anyways, I think we've kind of covered. I think we covered a good chunk of what the Bible says. I don't think there's much argument there that the Bible doesn't say, or it doesn't say that that the Bible doesn't say that a fetus has personhood. So I think we can kind of leave that one alone. Now it's the other stuff. Okay, so now we're talking to a Christian that doesn't, I mean, not a Christian, but somebody who's not a Christian who doesn't think that a fetus has personhood. And they're like, I care less what the Bible says. The Bible it means absolutely nothing to me. Blah blah blah. So now we're also talking to those people. We're talking to you. If you're listening to this and that's you, and you're not a Christian, you're like, I just don't think a fetus has personhood. We're going to challenge that a little bit. And so I just ask that you listen, hear us out, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And like I said, reach out to me. Let's talk some more. All you gotta do is email me at gracebombministries@gmail.com, and we'll interact a little bit, and then maybe have you on the podcast. So, all right. So what do we have next, Christian? We're talking about the development of the fetus.
Yeah. So this was one of my main portions, I think, of my paper, and some of the facts that I researched here, and some of the things that I found I would have never been able to tell you myself that until after I did this research. And so we see, especially 18 days after conception, the heart is forming. So just 2.5 weeks after, the heart is already forming within the baby.
And actually, somebody had to fact check me on this one, but I've heard pretty much at the moment of conception, that's when DNA starts forming. I mean, pretty much almost instantly, DNA starts forming, and which means that the baby is starting to form. I mean, almost instantly. Everybody knows that's kind of how it works. But DNA is actually forming the things that make us who we are is actually starting forming instantly. So yeah, that was just something that just popped into my head.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then just 21 days, so 3 weeks after, it's beating and pumping blood throughout the body. And then most women do not even know they're pregnant by this point. And so there's been arguments in the past going from the issue of the heartbeat. So we see here that most women don't even know they're pregnant, and the heartbeat has already started within the baby. So the first ultrasounds are usually given about 4 to 6 weeks. And then body parts are formed within the first couple months of being pregnant.
Yeah, so let me jump in there on the 4 to 6 weeks. So if you, and we're going to talk about this here in a second about the heartbeat builds, but the idea is that by week 6, the baby has a heartbeat. And so, so the reason most women, now granted, there are going to be women who find out they're pregnant before, but usually what happens is most women don't find out they're pregnant until they miss their period the next month. That's why they say 4 to 6 weeks. Because if a woman misses her period, then they're checking. It's okay, shoot, am I pregnant? Unless somebody's actually trying to get pregnant at the time, they may check a little more often and find out quicker. But most people, of course, those people aren't going to have abortions. But most people are going to do that. So, anyways, yeah, I just want to throw that in there, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to come back to that 4 to 6 weeks idea here, and when we talk about the heartbeat bill.
Yeah. And so we saw the body parts being formed the first couple months of the pregnancy, so within that first trimester. And then the brain is formed within the first 40 days, so within the first month and a half. 10 days after it is formed, the brain waves can even be recorded. So within the first 50 days of a pregnancy, within the first 2 months, you can see brain waves recorded. 42 days, the brain is controlling the movement of muscles and organs, just as any of ours would. And then for 12 weeks, so that would be with 12 weeks. So that'd be the right at the end of the first trimester, first 3 months. The baby is kicking, opening its mouth, bending wrists, making a fist, etc. So something we would see a baby out of the womb doing at any point in time. This baby is already doing after 12 weeks. And then if we look, this is a quote from Anne Freddie, and it says, "The moral case for abortion" is the name of her book. It says, "The premature baby at 23 weeks is indeed no different from the fetus, except that its life is supported by a machine system, not its mother's womb." And so we see even here, this lady who was for abortion saw that at 23 weeks, so after the second trimester, that this baby is no different than an infant outside of the womb. Just two different things supporting them.
So let's go back here. So at 23 weeks, where would the baby be at that point? Well,
About right towards the end of the second trimester, about 6 months.
Okay.
Like 1 week away from 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So she was saying, pretty much 3 months before the baby's due. That's when at that point it's pretty much murder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which, if you talk to a lot of people, especially, they'll break it down by trimesters. Like, hey, I agree with an abortion up until the first trimester, second trimester. Then you do have some rare cases where any abortion up until the point that the baby is born.
Yeah.
And some people only say that due to medical situations that may come up. But most of the time you can catch them before that point. My last really point on the development, probably one of the most interesting quotes I had found, is by a guy named Randy Alcorn. His book titled Pro-Life Answers to Pro-Choice Arguments. He said, "The unborn's brain sends a message to his own pituitary gland, which in turn stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete hormone, which stimulates the mother's uterus to contract. A woman goes into labor not because her body is ready to surrender the unborn child, but because the unborn child is ready to leave her body." And so a hormone coming from that child causes the woman's body to contract, therefore causes her to go into labor and the baby to be delivered. And so we see the importance of that child and how sophisticated even their bodies are at that point in the womb.
Yeah. So, I just want to give. Now we'll come back. We'll come back to it when we talk about the pro-choice side, because, especially with that quote from that lady. We'll come back and talk about that some more here. That is 23 weeks. Is that an okay time to say that the baby is a fetus? Let's come back to that. I want to talk about. Are you ready to move on? Let's do some of the application for today, and then move on to some of the pro-choice arguments.
Yeah, and so even a couple years ago in 2021, we saw this heartbeat bill going into action in a lot of Republican states that usually vote that side. The heartbeat bill would ban abortions if there's a heartbeat within the fetus. That was Idaho, Texas, Oklahoma, and South Carolina, or some of the first four that all enacted this law in 2021. And then 17 states total enacted laws restricting abortions at a certain point in 2021. And so even before this overturning of Roe v. Wade, we saw the country moving to enact some sort of laws to ban abortions at a certain point. Because Roe versus Wade was kind of just the start of it, where they said abortions were illegal, but now it's trying to decide at what point and then when. So I guess going to Roe v. Wade, it was back in 1973. You have Norma McCorvey, or as most of us know her as Jane Roe, claimed she had been raped. which she later recanted this statement, and that Texas law was forcing her to continue her pregnancy even though she had been impregnated against her will. And so this was the this was the case that originally put it into place where abortions were made legal, and that it was voided unconstitutional for them to force her to continue her pregnancy. Therefore, abortions were made legal. And I remember watching some video, I think in ethics class, where it had Norma McCorvey come on and say that she changed her mind on the status of abortion, where she actually became pro-life later on. But at that point, it had already been overturned. And I think most of us probably would not have thought it would be overturned as it is today. And a lot of the 13 states total enacted trigger laws that would ban medically unnecessary abortions in the first and second trimesters if the Roe versus Wade case was overturned. And so this was the pro-choice. This is what the pro-choice side saw. And I think for some people, they misunderstand what the Roe versus Wade case was exactly. Because once it's overturned, it's therefore enacted to the states, which if you see most of our democracy system, we like to give the states a lot of the voting rights. We don't want one central government to control us all. That's the point. More for democracy, where it's up to the voters, it's up to the state government.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people misunderstand that the overturning Roe v. Wade is, that's it. Now the abortion is illegal everywhere, but that's really not the case. It is a possibility, though, that it could be taken back to the Supreme Court, and that if the Supreme Court says, yes, the fetus has personhood, so we need to give the same rights to the fetus as we do to any other human being. If that happens, then from the Supreme Court, then it could be a national law against all abortion. So I think, and Remnant Radio did an excellent podcast on this. I highly suggest it. But they talked about abortion a couple of days after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Michael Brown's also a good one to listen to. But now I think they're right, though, that they mentioned that now more than ever is the time that we need to be ready to discuss these. We need to be ready to defend this. We need to be ready to discuss it, because now it's going to come down to the leaders we put in charge of our states. And at least at the moment, they're going to decide if abortion is allowed here or not. And we're also seeing companies that are saying, hey, my guess, I don't think it's happened in Florida yet, but my guess is Florida is going to be a state where abortion is going to be pretty much illegal, if not entirely. And so companies like, I can't remember all the companies, but I know Lyft is one of them. And what they're doing is when they're paying for health insurance or whatever, they're saying, we're going to cover the cost for you. And I think Lyft's doing it for maybe even customers, but we're going to cover, I shouldn't even put that out there, but we're going to cover the cost for you to go to another state where you can get an abortion, which, I mean, if you're down in here in Georgia or Florida or Alabama, I mean, you're going to have a ways to travel, but they may recant that idea here in a little bit, but especially with gas prices the way they are. But that's something that's coming up too. So we still need to be alert. We need to be able to talk about this stuff with people. We need to know what to say when people bring up these arguments that we're going to talk about here in just a second. How do we respond to these arguments? And what do I do? What do I do with one of my friends, or for me, Christian? What do we do if one of our youth gets pregnant and says, "Hey, I want to have an abortion"? Because I'm most of the time if a youth gets pregnant, it's because they're scared, they want to get rid of it, but what do we do? And so the practical application for for understanding this and understanding personhood and understanding the scriptures is that now more than ever, it's going to take, our discussion is really going to have a bigger impact than I think than has in a long time. I think it's going to be a big deal. And so we need to be ready. We need to be open. And now you're going to start seeing, a lot of states have already done it. I don't know all the list of states that have already, banned abortion pretty much, but you could probably guess which ones I probably have already. But, now we just, I don't know. I think that's the most important application is now we're going to be so much more involved in this. We're going to have, I feel like we're going to have more of a say in it than we have, at least since I've been born, because I wasn't born before Roe v. Wade happened. So I was born way after Roe v. Wade happened, actually. So that's, we're excited about that. And so if a fetus does have the qualities of personhood, and we can argue and show biblically, scientifically, and philosophically that that a fetus does have personhood, that means that that we need to argue and say that these fetuses are not just fetuses; they're actually children, and that they have the same rights as a child that's 5 years old, or a child that's 7 years old, or an adult that's 40 years old. They have the same rights as any other person in this country. So, is there anything else to cover there before we get into the pro-choice arguments?
I think we're ready to go to the arguments now.
All right, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So, looking back, I guess from the point of Roe v. Wade, arguments have come up from the pro-choice side as pro-lifers try to argue against abortion is this issue of viability. So, when are they viable? When are they able to survive on their own? And so, I mean, you look back at the quote of the development that at 23 weeks, even the woman who said pro-choice, that they're able to live, one person's dependent on their mother's womb, one person's dependent on a system. And I've known babies be born, I don't know if it was quite as early as 23 weeks, but they were about 1 pound and 8 ounces or something like that. So super small. And the medical technology now, they were able to survive and are doing well now. And then if you argue viability at that point, infants are still considered dependent on their parents when they're born. So this young infant would be no more dependent on their mother as this baby is to the mother's womb. So this child, even when they're at that point of 2 or 3, cannot do many things on their own. They still need that help. And then viability, a lot of people bring up the issue of when your relatives or one of your family members get super old and they're pretty much dependent on you. They may have that brain capacity of a 2 or 3-year-old at that point. And so are you willing to say that they're not a person just like this baby is? And so that's kind of the issue of viability.
Yeah, that's troubling. That's why states, like New York, have considered abortions after birth, because a baby's still not able to is still not independent. They still have to have a mother. I mean, my baby is almost 11 months now next month, and and I couldn't just leave her at the house and say, okay, we'll be back in 8 hours. I can't do that. I mean, obviously she's still independent. I mean, she's still dependent on Allie and I to take care of her. And really, I mean, especially the way the U.S. law works, a child is independent. I mean, it's dependent on their parents until they're 18. So, so if we really go down that route, then we could. I don't know why you couldn't say that somebody, if your kid becomes a teenager and they're a pain in the butt, and you decide I don't want to deal with them anymore, you could say that they're still dependent on me, so I have the choice whether or not to end their lives or not. I think that's kind of the consistency of that argument. Now, if you can argue that somehow the child is, I don't know how you could, but you could try to argue somehow the child is independent the day it's born. But even then, I mean, like I said, there's no way. A child is not independent for years. And so I think it's just a bad argument. And we've got a couple more arguments about personhood, and really I think you'll see at the end of this that pretty much every argument from a pro-choice perspective is going to come down to are we talking about a person here or not? That's where every argument's really going to come down to. And you'll see pro-choice people, they'll try to drift away from that and talk about different things, to try to get away from that personhood debate. I think it's because they have a weak argument when it comes to it not containing the qualities of personhood. So, all right, you ready for the next one?
Yeah, and so a little bit along the same lines, but a different perspective is the argument from the point of rationale. So, are they a rational being? Do they know what's going on, what they're doing? And so, Jonathan brought up the beautiful example of John the Baptist in the womb. And you see at that point, even if it was a point in the spirit, clearly the baby knew what was going on. John the Baptist knew what was going on. That's why he kicked his mother. And you see that in a lot of mothers, that they'll say certain things, or during a point they'll do some things. The baby is kicking, the baby is moving. And you see that within most pregnancies. I heard an example of this person that we had was sharing at a youth camp, that he listened to this new song that he thought was new, and he said that he loved it, and he came back and he had told his mother that he loved this new song that he had heard, or it was new to him. He had heard the song, he loved it, and he's like, I feel like I know it for some reason. And the mother told him, yeah, because I used to sing you that song when you were in the womb. And so I don't know how he has that good of a memory, but something crazy like that.
I've heard stories of that with newborn babies. You know, if you'll sing to them, my friend was like that. He's like, you know, we sang to my daughter when she was still in the womb, and she said, I mean, the first couple, I don't remember how quick it was after she was born, but he said the first couple of weeks we'd sing that song again, and she would smile when she heard the song. So I think there is some kind of connection there.
Yeah. Gives you a lot more responsibility on what you do, what you say, even when she's pregnant. And so, ability to know what they're doing, what's going on. If you have watched the movie Unplanned, if you've watched certain videos on the act of abortion, when they do the actual procedure, not the pill version, but when they do the procedure, they say that you can sometimes see this child trying to pull away, knowing that it is being attacked. It is being ripped apart, basically limb by limb. That's how they do it. Just one limb at a time, slowly taking it through. And so we see that the child clearly knows what is going on at this point. So do you have anything to add on that one, Jonathan?
No, I think you covered that one pretty good.
All right. It goes, the next one's having the ability to feel as in the five senses. And so that kind of intertwines with that one. Psalm 51:6 says, behold, you desire truth in the innermost being, and in the hidden part, you will make me know wisdom. And so there's a little bit of knowledge even within the womb. And then you want to go on to the next one, Jonathan.
Yeah, that one's interesting, because I can understand. Okay, you're talking about a fetus, and you're saying, okay, the fetus doesn't have all five senses. I don't know the science behind that one. I'm kind of ignorant there, but I don't know at what point a child has all five senses. Of course, then what if a child's born deaf or something?
Yeah.
But they also say stuff like, hey, if you're gonna pierce your like Emerald's ears are already pierced. You do that as a child because she can feel pain, but there's a lot of aspects of the pain that aren't there because she's younger. Like the fear, the anxiety of it. Because she doesn't know what's going on. So I think if you try to make the case that the child has to have all five senses and it has to be rational and has viability, if you try to make that case, I think you could make any of those cases extend further after the date of birth. I think you can extend those further than that. And so that's one thing, and most pro-choice people will not do that. I have hardly run across any that are pro-choice that say, you know what, I think it's okay even after birth to still kill the child. It just, and I think at that point, you're actually you're holding the baby in your hand because, I know even for me, like when Allie was pregnant, and I'm sure I was still in shock. It was surreal. And when the baby was in her womb, I'm like, okay, I notice you're pregnant. I can feel the kicking, but I don't really see a person here, you know? Even in the ultrasounds, I could see a face, but you know, it was still, I mean, it was still a little fuzzy. You know, I'm sure for her it was a lot different because she was the one that was actually pregnant. You know, I'm sure for her it felt like, hey, there's a being inside of me. You know, but for me, there was still kind of that disconnect there until the day I held her when she was born. That was the day I'm like, this is a person. You know, this is crazy. This is awesome. You know, now in my head and scientifically and philosophically, all the stuff we've been talking about, yeah, I know all that. You know, I knew that, hey, you know, in my mind, I knew that there was a child in my wife's womb. You know, there was no question about that in my mind, but it didn't really hit me in the emotional sense until I held her in my own hands. And I would imagine that's probably the same for a lot of people. So I would imagine too that if a mother says, yes, I'm going to have an abortion, but I'm going to wait till after the birth. As soon as she held that baby in her hands, I think she would have some serious doubts and some serious conviction after and guilt and stuff after doing that. And I would bet money that she would probably back out of that. You know, and probably what they would do is make sure, you know, if that was what she wanted to do, to make sure she never saw the baby, because the doctors probably know too that
Yeah.
she would back out. Because then you can experience it, and that's part of the pragmatism of today. You know, everybody's got to experience something to believe it or whatever, but I think that affects it a little bit today. So all right, you want me to get started on the next ones?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I want to do these in the order I put them. Let's go through something silly first. I shouldn't say that. Yes, I can. um, so I had a guy. I call him Shrooms Guy, but a long story, long story. But he, the very first time I talked to this guy, he said we were arguing about abortion years ago. This is when heartbeat bills were starting to come out. Whatever you said that was, but is that 2021? Well, it started a little bit before then too, but
Yeah,
because I mean I was still in school. But anyways, doesn't matter. But anyways, when heartbeat bills started coming out, the discussion was starting to build up, and so I got online, of course, running my mouth. And so, anyways, I'm arguing with this guy, and he says, because part of the arguments are, you know, what is it really worth keeping the child if the child's going to have to go through this terrible system of being an orphan and being in an adoption, dealing with adoption and foster care. You know, if we're really going to put a child through stuff like that, is it really worth it to keep the child here on the earth? Um, and so one of these guys, he said, well, just let the baby die, and then the baby can be reincarnated into a better life. And so obviously there, it's you got to jump into a whole nother conversation about reincarnation. That's what we did, and that's when I learned about all his crazy beliefs. But crazy beliefs. Maybe that's a pod. It was a bunch of new age stuff. Excuse me. But all right. So that one. I mean, if reincarnation is actually a thing, okay. Or if you want to debate reincarnation, then I can say, okay, we can actually talk about that. But most people aren't going to argue to kill the baby so they can be reincarnated. That's probably not going to be an argument you're going to hear very often. Um, one of the ones I heard one time was, okay, so you're saying that if a mother decides to abort a baby before the baby is born, that it's actually the mother killing the child. And then she said, well, what about if the child was born and at the age of 5, the child is having liver failure or something, and the child needs a liver, the mother's a match, the mother decides, no, I'm not going to give my liver to my child, you know? Then is the mother still killing the child? So I was telling Christian earlier before we started, I said, most parents, if they have a child, they're probably not going to struggle with that too much. Most parents are willing to do whatever for their child, but if you had a child and you did give the baby over to foster care and adoption or whatever, and then somebody contacted you later after you've kind of completely disassociated yourself with this child, then it might get a little more difficult. But there is a major difference, though, is because here it is not the parent actively killing the child. And I think part of the argument, too, of course, they got to make it the worst possible scenario, is that the mother was also, maybe her life was also threatened if she lost her liver or whatever, So, of course, they always want to make it the worst possible scenario, some unforeseen thing that's probably never going to happen. hardly anybody. But the difference though is that it is not. It's whatever the disease is that's killing the liver. That's what's actively killing the child. As in an abortion, it's the mother actively choosing, I'm going to let this child die by whatever means your doctor allows you to. So it's a little different there. But either way, the personhood argument still goes back, and you got to say, okay, it is because the fetus has the qualities of personhood that I'm not able to abort my child before she's born. Let's see, I got more here. What about the women who are at risk of death and need abortion? That one's, man, apparently I'm popular today. What about women who are at risk of death who need an abortion? Now, this one's going to be a little more difficult, and I think you'll see this a lot in states. And it's a lot more difficult for me because if there's one circumstance where I really, really struggle, it's what if that mother goes into the room and they say, if you have this child, your chances of survival are only 60% or 70%. That's a scary thought. And I've heard people have gone through that and still decided to go through with the birth, and how God worked through it and everybody was safe, everybody came out healthy, but that's a difficult one. So I think even in pro-life circles, you're going to hear there's probably going to be legislation that protects women in this sort of thing. So that's where I'm going to go with that and support that. And it's not. I think though that no matter what happens, that the mother should try whatever it would take to not. I don't know. It's a tough one. This is probably one of the toughest of all of them. Is these women who their health is at risk. I think that's always going to be a tough one. So there's going to have to be legislation that allows it. If sometimes the odds are very high that the mother's going to die, or almost it's almost impossible that the mother's going to live. In cases like that, it's going to be a little tougher decision. So I think legislation needs to be open to that. The problem is then we're going to have doctors who are also lying. They're going to lie for their patients and say, well, no, the mother's life's at risk here. We need to abort the baby. I think that's also going to happen. But I don't think we need to criminalize women whose lives are at a high risk, if they go through with a birth, or almost at a certain risk. I think we need legislation that protects women in those circumstances. But Christian, you got anything to add about that?
Yeah, I'm right with you. That's probably one of the hardest arguments you have to go through thinking about this. And I think the further along we go, especially with our medical technology, this idea or this issue will be smaller and smaller because they're able to do things that prevent anything that would happen to the mother. I mean, I've heard stories. I mean, the story of Tim Tebow is his mother was supposed to die, and they were trying to get her. The doctors were almost begging her to have an abortion, to abort Tebow in order to save her life. And she did what, I don't know if everybody could do, is she had that faith that God would do what his plan was, and that God would keep her safe. And it ended up, she lost a lot of blood, but she survived. Tebow was born pretty much healthy, and we see where he is now and everything he's been able to do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. And that's the problem is for one, this is rare. This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen all the time. I do know somebody that I personally know somebody who went through this, and I probably shouldn't mention his name, but his wife was told that if you go through with this birth, there's a very, very high chance that the baby and you could die. That's intense. So it's going to be difficult, and it's something I think we need to still discuss. So if we can get past all this, the fetus isn't a person and all that, then we can get to some of these more difficult issues, and come up with possible solutions. But I think we need to. I think we do. I think we need to leave some openings there for that. Now, the other one people bring up is, what about cases of rape? If a woman is raped, I saw a meme on Facebook yesterday even that said, okay, a 10-year-old girl still has to sit in a booster seat in a car, but if she's raped and gets pregnant, then you're going to make her go through with the pregnancy. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, I'm not sure a 10-year-old girl can be pregnant. Um, it'd be a close call, but um, this is another one. This is very rare. The problem with this one is it is extremely traumatic. I mean, the people I know who have been even just sexually assaulted and not raped, the mental damage it does to somebody is I don't want to use the word extraordinary, but it's a lot, and it's tough, and it's almost and they get PTSD too, so they get like these triggers, with like guys who have been in the military and stuff, or me, I work in a funeral home, and there's certain things I've seen and done that I didn't like, and it kind of messes with me sometimes. It'll kind of pop up into my head, and there's certain things that I'll do, and it'll remind me of something, and it kind of freaks me out for a second. There's these triggers, and so for a woman that's raped, if she goes through with the birth, she's going to constantly have that trigger, that remembrance of the day she was raped. And I mean, it could be. I can imagine the anxiety and the fear and all of that can come along with that. And then even if you went through with the birth, how do you explain that to your child when he asks, "Where's my father?" And then you're still living in that triggering those triggers throughout the rest of your life. So here's the problem though, and this is where I kind of come down on this. Now, keep in mind, this hardly ever happens. Statistically, this hardly ever happens. One of the statistics I saw that where in cases of rape or serious health concerns for the mother, these are I heard one time it was less than 6% of all abortions, but I'm not sure if that statistics changed or whatever. But anyways, I think if we can still make a case that the fetus is a person, that the fetus still has the rights of any other person, so what if somebody went through with a birth, and then at 5 years old that child was still a trigger for them, reminding them of that rape? Would it be okay to kill them then? No, of course not. And so we would transfer that back because we think the fetus has personhood. Then we would transfer that 5-year, the way you feel about the 5-year-old, we would transfer that back to the fetus. So here's the thing though, is we've really got to be extremely sensitive to women who do end up going through this. I have never met anybody who's been through this, and I don't understand all the traumatic experience of rape and all of that. I don't understand all of that. I've been around people who have been raped and not gotten pregnant, but we need to be very sensitive, but we need to, I think the best thing for that person to do, because the fetus does have the qualities of personhood, is to try their hardest to go through with it, because that fetus, that child inside of you, God has a purpose for them. God has a life plan for them. That could be, who knows? Who knows what the life of that child could develop into, so I know it's going to be tough. It's going to be it's probably be the toughest thing you ever have to go through in your entire life. It may even be tougher than the day you were raped, but I think it's something that's worth it. And if you have that baby and you can bring something, God says that even in the midst of evil, he can bring good out of something. If you can bring good out of something so evil and corrupt and something criminal, if you can do that, I think God will bless it. And so I think though that we've got to stick to the personhood argument. That's a person inside of you. That's a child inside of you. That's a child that's going to have a career. That's a child that could change the world. That's a child that's going to have a family of its own, and so I think we've still got to remind ourselves of that, even in the midst of such a sticky, just a terrible situation. We've got to remind ourselves of that, and then I would fully understand, if you had to go through something like that and you were willing to go through with the birth, and you had to give the baby up for adoption. I wouldn't blame you one bit, because I know it'd be very difficult to raise a child with that in the back of your mind. But I think you need, and I would fight for laws that would make it necessary for somebody, even if they're raped, to go through with it. And I just think we as a church and pregnancy help centers and stuff, we need to be prepared for that. We need to have counseling. We need to have people that can meet with these women and be there for them during that difficult time. And that's going to be that'd probably be the one thing that everybody just absolutely gets infuriated with me on when I say stuff like that, but and just believe me, the main reason I keep coming back to, hey, you need to go through with this is because of the qualities of personhood in the fetus, in the child. There is qualities of personhood. That's a person inside of you that has a life of their own. And I only had two more. We hear this one a lot. We got two men right now talking on this podcast about abortion. Should men really be making the choices for women? Which kind of goes along with this other argument. I know plenty of pro-life people that they're pro-life themselves, but they think that every person should be able to make the choice whether or not to have an abortion. It needs to be left up to the individual, which I think that's subjective relativism that's creeping in, subjective morality that's creeping in. We need to let everybody be subjective, choose their own morality, and that's not how the world works. That's not how God created the world. And if you want to hear an argument about objective morality, well, we talked about it a little bit on the Problem of Evil podcast, but there's plenty of speakers out there. I can help you understand that, and we may even talk about that some more in a future podcast. But so there's a reason. I think I think you're going to have a hard time calling yourself pro-life if you're still saying, hey, it's okay for them to murder somebody. I'm not willing to say that that's wrong. And then not only that, if we're going to be consistent, are we going to say that, why don't we do that with all the laws? If you want to rape somebody, you go ahead. You make your own choice. Oh, you want to murder somebody, you go ahead. You make your own choice. I choose not to murder. That's just my personal thing. You choose whatever you want to do. No, obviously there's some inconsistency here in people who have this viewpoint. And I get it. And I get why people want to do this, because it's such a hot topic issue and there's people debating all the time about it. I get why people want to do it. I just don't think it's the right call to make. And I don't think you can sit firm on the word of God and support the word of God and turn around and say, I'm pro-life, but it's okay if people make pro-choice choices. I think we need to fight as Christians for pro-life legislation. So you got anything? I mentioned a lot there. So
yeah, this is going to be one of the toughest ones that we have to stand against. It could be one of the most hated views that we might have in this issue of abortion. And Jonathan had talked about earlier, we need to show compassion. We need to be there, have that counseling, because I don't think a lot of churches some churches may hear the word abortion, or somebody had an abortion, and just treat them as somebody that has the scarlet letter or is an outsider. But we need to be there, be compassionate. And now when we're thinking of abortion morally, when we're trying to have our logical arguments, we can't let emotions take over. And so I think that's why we need to focus on that idea of personhood, because it allows us to think about what God had already put in place. So it wasn't a man making the decision for a woman if God had already put it in place. And so we need to keep our eyes focused on that. Now, that doesn't keep us away from having the compassion. And I know a lot of arguments we see is the argument of, I don't have enough money, or it's not a good time for me. We made the argument, or I said earlier, about God's timing not being our timing. There's that. And then I think a lot of people may not know the resources that are actually out there for single mothers and different pregnancy care centers. There's one, I think, even in Savannah, the Living Vine, I think it still exists, that helps with housing and everything.
I've lived in 4, 5, 6, 7 counties. I've never lived in a county where there wasn't a center for something like that. And I've never heard any of them say, hey, we're sending people away because we don't have the resources. I've never heard that. And so for people like us, and Christian and I are in a good spot. Being, I think we are in very good positions being pro-life, because we're probably going to run into, unfortunately, we're probably going to run into a youth that gets pregnant, at some point in youth ministry. And one of our friends, he's also a youth pastor. He's run into that before, and I saw. When I was in the midst of that and seeing him handling it, they were reaching out to, I mean, gosh, half a dozen churches, saying, "Hey, listen, she's about to have a child, and we're trying to help her. Can you give us money? Can you give us the resources she needs? Can you buy her some diapers? Can you?" And so all these churches were chipping in. And so for us, like, if there was a youth in my group and she was going through something like this, I could make it happen. Now, Christian and I, neither one of us individually has the resources where I couldn't say, yes, I'll take care of your child for you, pretty much. We don't have those kinds of resources, but we can get you connected to other resources. So if you're watching this, I have no idea where you're watching this from, but odds are that if you needed help, you could email us and we could do some research and we could find you a pregnancy help center somewhere, at least fairly close to you. So and especially in Georgia and Florida, there's pregnancy centers around here all over the place to help, and they really do help. They'll help you through there. They'll help you get ultrasounds. They'll help you with buying toys and bottles and diapers and all this stuff, and churches support them. And so a lot of times as churches, what we're going to do is we're going to counsel people. We're going to sit through this with people, and we just want people to know we're there. And we get critiqued a lot for not doing this, not doing that, or whatever. But I have yet to meet a Christian church that says we are unwilling to help somebody going through this crisis. I have never met a Christian church like that. And so, but the problem is sometimes people have so much hatred for us that they're not reaching out to us for help. So we're trying, and that's what these pregnancy centers are trying to do. They're trying to reach out to these people who are struggling through this and help them through this. And so, and recently, there's legislations coming up, and leaders are saying, hey, we need to get rid of these pregnancy centers because they're sharing propaganda about abortion, pretty much some of the same stuff I'm sure that me and Christian said today. They're saying that's just propaganda, and these anti-abortion clinics are ruining this and all this stuff. And so they're wanting to shut down these places, but I think they're going to have a difficulty because of how much these places really help people. And so, listen, like Christian said, if you're a Christian, you're listening to this, we need to love these people going through this. This is going to be one of the most difficult things they have to go through in their entire lives, especially if it's in one of those more intense cases like rape or something. It's going to be so intense. It's going to be so heavy. They need our help. They need our love. They need our support. And listen, if you're listening to this and you're just looking for encouragement, we want to help. We want to find somebody that can help you. I don't know what I could do. If you're somewhere in Wisconsin, I don't know what I could do, but I'll try my hardest to find you some help. And if you're closer to me or whatever, you can reach out to me personally. And if you're local, I definitely know places I can look to for help for you. So Christian, give us some final words here, and just go ahead and close us out, and I'll stop the recording.
Yeah, and so we saw all of these different arguments. We see the development of the fetus and how even within that first trimester, the heart is there, the heart is beating. And with that heartbeat, we see the importance of that child. We see the personhood, and through the scriptures, we see how important each and every person, each and every life is to God, and that they were made in his image. And so as we look at this argument, let us not forget that point. But as we go out, as we see people, we can't let maybe their sin of having that child out of wedlock get in the way of us showing compassion to them, bringing them closer to God. Because if we just let them go, not give them any resources, just shun them away, they're not going to come to God. Because a lot of times, some of these cases may be people that are not saved. And so, of course, they're going to choose the easier option, the way of comfort, the way of the world. But if we are to draw them closer to God, we must show that compassion that God showed for us, because we are, Jesus told us if we're angry at our brother, then we are murderers also. And so as sinners, We need to see how God gave grace to us and now give it to others as we go through this life, and be able to stand firm for what we truly believe in, for this argument that's, I don't think, going to go away anytime soon, but it looks like it's going in the right direction. So as we vote, let it be conviction of what God has shown us.
Yeah. And just one last thing, I just popped in my head, because this is going to be coming up too, I think. Dr. Brown brought this up. There's going to be a lot of people, I think, that went through abortions, or, there's going to be a lot of men who's, whoever the woman is that got pregnant, if that woman decides on an abortion or had an abortion, there's going to be men struggling with it. There's going to be women struggling with it that have already had an abortion. That's another thing I think we need to be prepared for as a church is, hey, we want to sit next to you and help you get through this. I'm sure it's tough because a lot of people have abortions and then later on they think, wow, I just killed a child, we want to help with that too. So, reach out to us, find somebody to talk to, go to a pastor and talk to them about it. And, if you can't find anybody that's willing to talk to you about it, email me, we'll figure something out. Right. We want to help. We want to get the arguments out there because we want to put the arguments behind us so we can start working forward to the solutions now that abortion is going to actually be illegal in some states. We want to work towards the solutions. We want to work towards the counseling and all the help that we can give. That's the next step after Roe v. Wade is overturned, is working towards those solutions now. So anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I know it's been a long podcast, but I think we covered a great amount of stuff. If there's anything you want to add, any other questions you may have, email us, gracebondministries@gmail.com, and we'll take a look. And if you want to get on here and kind of give your views or argue with one of us or a Christian, just let us know and we'll have you on. All right. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all on the next podcast.
Thank you so much for watching the Grace Bond Ministries podcast or listening to the podcast. I know there's various ways that you could be listening to this right now or watching this right now, but I just want to say thank you so much. And if you would, wherever you're listening, if you're listening on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Podcast, please leave a 5-star review and write a little thing in there. If you're on Facebook, leave a comment. Let me know how this impacted you, or even any other questions or comments or concerns you may have. And also, if you have an idea or you have something you'd really want to talk more deeply about, you can always email me at gracebondministries@gmail.com. But thank you so much. Remember, for it is by grace you are saved through faith, and not of yourselves, for it is the gift of God. Thank you for listening to Grace Bond Ministries.